What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Fat Guy, White Trash Guy Reads the Communist Manifesto. Appreciate all of your support and positive feedback. Obviously, there's a few trolls, but no shit. Anywhere this word is, there's going to be trolls. So, appreciate the people who are looking forward to the new episodes and stuff like that. I hope that this series is giving you what I'm trying to give, in that this is an environment where we are judgment free, and we're just trying to read these texts because they're important. For me, I value lived experience as much as theory, but I know some people value theory even more. But I think theory has a place in this movement. But there are a lot of working class people who understand these principles without having ever read them. But it's nice to inform what you already know with somebody who wrote this 200 years ago, basically understands your struggle. You know what I mean? So it's just meant to be a series where we just sit down and read, and we don't judge. We listen and we don't judge. So when we left off, it was ending chapter 1. So now we're in chapter 2. No promises I'll finish chapter 2 here, but why don't we just get started and see how far we get. This is chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from other working class parties by this only. 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. 2. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding that line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. So basically, he's saying the communists are the ambassadors for the proletariat. They're the stewards. They're the people who are going to stand at the front line and speak for the working class. That's what he's getting at, it seems like. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all the other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. Don't really know what I just read right there. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. Can't fucking read. We communists have been reproached by the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it and is destroying it daily. This is something I literally touched on last episode, is private versus personal property. When people say, I don't want a communist to come and take my house, Karl Marx is literally saying, communists don't want to take your house. The bourgeoisie already did. You don't even own your house. The bank does. You pay them a mortgage. That's if you're doing well. People can't even afford a mortgage nowadays. You're renting from somebody who is paying a bank who owns the house. So the landlord is paying the mortgage. You're paying the rent to the landlord. Or if you rent an apartment, you're renting from a corporation, most likely. So commies don't want to take your house, bro. They want to take your house from your landlord and give it to you. Quite literally. The only thing they want to take that you might be involved in, they want to take your place of work from the corporation that owns it and give it to you, collectively, the workers. And he's basically saying that there's no need to abolish personal property because the bourgeoisie is already doing that. You will own nothing and be happy. Isn't that something we've always heard? And God, it's true today. Jesus Christ. So, already destroyed it. Yeah, so, or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e. that kind of property which exploits wage labor, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property in its present form is based upon the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of the antagonism. Let's do that. To be a capitalist is to be a bitch. No, okay, sorry, that was my little blurb. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal, but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society can it be set in motion. Yeah. It took me a second to get it. Capital is therefore not a personal, it is a social power. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. Let us now take wage labor. He basically just said the exact thing that I was getting at, because I've Googled this situation before in stupid debates with idiots online. So this is something I've already learned, even though I've never actually read this text. So let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e., that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. Which, that alone is not even true anymore. That's what minimum wage is supposed to be. Minimum wage is supposed to be a living wage. By definition, the minimum wage, you can be paid to survive. And in America, minimum wage is $7.25. Gas is probably up to fucking $7 in high cost of living areas like California. You know, lower cost of living areas, it's $5 a gallon right now. But, you know, and also individual states, they don't have the federal minimum wage anymore. A lot of them have gone higher than that. But the fact that the federal minimum wage is still $7.25 is utterly ridiculous. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. That feels like it's written in 2026, does it not? That's crazy. That last little paragraph there, talking about how wage laborers, all they do is serve to make somebody else rich and make just enough to not die. And what kind of life is that? You know what I mean? We can do so much better. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In a communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. Which is insane, because America's supposed to be this land of opportunity and individuality and personal liberty, and it's all a fucking scam, okay? It's all a fucking joke. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeoisie, by the bourgeois, abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. So it sounds like the individuality is for the rich only. And that's what a lot of this is when they say things like our democracy is at risk. They're not talking about us, you and I, wage laborers, proletarians. They're talking about the top 1%. The way things are working for them is at risk, and they've peddled this propaganda so that the middle class people are now parroting the same exact thing, even though there's whatever. We'll move on. It's supposed to be reading, not woke fatty bitching every sentence. Anyway, by freedom is meant under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communist abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and of the bourgeoisie itself. Another one of those word salads we talked about. I have no fucking idea what I just read. Page 25. Somebody help me out in the comments. Jesus Christ. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. Long sentence, but I understand what he's saying. The people who own everything can only own everything because we own nothing, right? So if they didn't own everything, we could own stuff. We could have stuff. We can't have nice shit because Elon Musk is going to be a trillionaire next year, right? Your medicine is unattainable. Your rent is way too high because Jeff Bezos has to have a third mega yacht that's big enough for, 150 people to live on or whatever. I don't know. Making that up, but you get what I'm saying. Where the fuck? Where did I... Oh, sorry. Dude, I gotta put my finger down when I go on a rant. In a word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e. from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment you say individuality vanishes. So when the rich are no longer able to fuck you, suddenly freedom is fucked and everything's fucked because I'm not allowed to exploit my workers anymore. You know, it's very a familiar thing. We hear shit about that a lot. Stuff along that same line. I goddamn lost my shit again. Oh, got it. You must, therefore, confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle-class owner of property. This person must, indeed, be swept out of the way and made impossible. Made impossible. You are impossible. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. So communism isn't going to stop you from doing what you want to do. It's just not going to let you do what you want to do by fucking other people over, is the whole idea, right? And why is that controversial? Anyway, it has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology. There can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communist mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communist modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeoisie, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. Yeah. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is, for the enormous majority, a mere training to act as a machine. Holy fuck! Banger line, Carl. Holy fuck. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property the standard of your bourgeois nations of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property. Just as your jurisprudence, fucking never ever seen that word in my life, is but the will of your class made into a law for all. A will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economic conditions of existence of your class. The selfish misconception that induces you... He's just dissing the fuck out of him right now, dude. This is literally a diss track. Holy fuck. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason, the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production, this misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. When you see what you see clearly is the case of ancient property. What you admit in the case of feudal property, you are, of course, forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. He just fucking pivoted really fast. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital? On private gain? It is completely developed from... In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians, and in public prostitution. Public prostitution? Jesus Christ. Probably means something different than I'm thinking. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Fuck. Tough. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime, we plead guilty. But you will say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate by the intervention of society, direct or indirect, by means of schools, etc.? The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. So stop fucking indoctrinating our children with your bullshit, basically, is what he's saying. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. Damn, Marx was even on the misogynist ass right here. He's not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at it is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. He's cooking right now, folks. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system, i.e. of prostitution, both public and private. So, here's something that we talk about a lot in Marxist circles is sex work and what Marx has said about sex work. He's basically, people will take this at face value and say that Marx doesn't support sex work and that it is not revolutionary to be a sex worker. That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying that the system itself is exploitative. So he's not saying that if you're a sex worker, you're a piece of shit. He's saying that if you're a sex worker, you shouldn't have to be, basically, is what it sounds like, to me anyway. Which I agree with. No one should have to do that to survive. But that doesn't mean that we should judge them for doing what they have to do to survive either. And he's basically saying that in a communist society, there wouldn't be need for sex work because women wouldn't be exploited in the way that they are right now. Brother fucking cooked over here, dude. And it pisses me off that people try to... having read this is the first time I've read exactly what he's talking about with prostitution. It bothers me that people try and twist his words into basically saying that sex work is bad. Just because of what he says here. And that we should treat sex workers badly. Like, he's saying that sex work is exploitation, as with any other job. And that's the opinion I've held for a long time anyway, before even having read this. But discuss in the comments. I mean, to me, that's what it reads like. Maybe to someone else it sounds differently. But that's what this is for, is not to judge people. That's what I want to do, is to spread understanding, not judgment. Unless you're a capitalist, fuck off. No, I'm kidding. Well, only kind of kidding. The working men... Wait. Okay, the communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation, it is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. W. National differences and antagonisms between peoples are vanishing gradually from day to day, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production, and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. This is imperialism he's talking about. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. He basically just fucking roasted you. Said, it's not even worth fucking debating you because you're dumb. Man, this guy's personality comes through, even though it's a very scientific text. He doesn't have a ton of tone. There's a little bit of tone there. And it's cunt. He's serving cunt. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations, and in his social life? What else does the history of ideas prove than that the intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production has changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. He's basically saying the rich write the history, essentially. And ain't that a bitch? When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. Yeah. That makes sense. As old ways are sort of coming out of favor, new ways are coming into favor, and that's, he's just describing memes, basically. No, sorry. Sorry. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, quote, religion, moral and philosophical and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survive this change. There are, besides, eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality instead of constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past ages, viz., I don't know how to say that word, V-I-Z, the exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas which cannot completely vanish, except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. That was kind of hard for me to follow. I feel stupid. But let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to establish democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all tenths of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. Fucking pause, Carl. What does that mean? 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. 8. Equal obligation of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the population over the country. And 10. Free education for all children in public schools, abolition of child factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, etc. When, in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared, and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class, if by means of a revolution, it makes itself the ruling class, and, as such, sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms, and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Okay, I believe that is the end of Chapter 2. It is. So that's all we're going to read today. But I want to talk about here at the end this list of 10 things, because this is something that is, well, number one, confiscation of all the property of emigrants and rebels. I need to look up what emigrants means right now, because I don't know if that is the same thing as an immigrant, and what a rebel is. I don't know. It's also something. So, okay, supposedly an immigrant is an immigrant. That's fucking weird. And I can't look past that. And part of it, too, is the time. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. I'm not... Somebody in the comments, please explain that in the context of which it's written, because that's fucking weird. At first glance reading it to me. And then also some of these things are not relevant today. Child factories in America are not really a thing. Now, there have been some investigations of underage workers, but it's not like it was in the 1800s. So some of these things are things that, like I wouldn't say that this is the list for 2026, is what I'm trying to get at. Like this is not, like he says, it'll be pretty generally applicable, but it's really not in 2026. A lot of these things, the agriculture and manufacturing, because we are so far into the Industrial Revolution, it's not like countries are trying to move out of agrarian economies anymore. You know what I mean? This was a big problem with Mao in China. He was trying to take a country that was an agrarian economy into an industrial one. And the Great Leap Forward, obviously. And that's not a thing in America. You know what I mean? We're not like, America's one of the most developed countries, even though it's a shithole for people like me and you, but you get what I'm trying to say here. It's not like we're trying to take America from an agrarian economy to industrial. So that's where maybe some more modern revolutionaries could talk about something like that. And maybe somebody like Malcolm X, who lived in America in the 60s. And I actually just got a book in today, By Any Means Necessary, by Malcolm X, and maybe I'll read that on this channel. But so that's why, and I've said at the beginning of this series, that some of these things you have to understand that this was written in the 1800s. And some things just aren't going to translate as much. Now, some of those, for sure, some of those base concepts about taking property from the ruling class and distributing it back to the workers, that's obviously going to translate. But some of those things are very much a product of the time. And so you have to, I would say that we don't need to look at that list of 10 things and write that down as if, like, that's what has to happen for a revolution in America. Like he said, the list is going to be different in different places. And so he literally does say that, and it's different here. It's different in 2026. So that's really all I have to say about that. But genuinely, if somebody has some better context of what he's talking about by confiscating property from immigrants and rebels, what is a rebel in this case? What is in the context? Because it doesn't read good from someone, in America, the demonization of immigrants in America, I'm very, weary of hearing somebody say that. So if somebody knows exactly what he's getting at, please let me know in the comments. But otherwise, that was chapter 2. I didn't think I'd get through it all, but we did. So obviously in the next video, we'll hit chapter 3. I appreciate you for watching if you've watched this far, even if it's something you put on at bedtime. That's the type of shit I'd be doing. So yeah, let's discuss in the comments. Appreciate everybody for tuning in, and obviously, I'll see you in the next one. I've been Woke Fatty. I'm a white trash guy, and I'm just trying to read books more, because physical media needs to make a comeback, for sure. Treat your neighbors right, protect your community, hug your family, hug your kitties, and try to enjoy life too. All right? Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.